medicine, or what I call true medicine, and allopathy, because allopathy is a cult. It is a religion. And you were never taught that. You were probably not taught that in school when you learned about the heroes and the great research of the foundations of allopathic medicine. You weren't told that the first 100 years, most of these people were prosecuted for equivalence of war crimes. Many of them went to prison. Many of them were forced into judgments for criminal activity. B.F. Skinner, the father of modern psychology, father of modern psychiatry, there was a group that tried to have him put in prison for felony child endangerment because he took his own daughter and put her in a Skinner box for the first year of her life, to see what would happen with a child that was in isolation without being touched, with no physical communication, touch, or nurturing from another human being for a first year. And when it came out that he had his baby daughter in a laboratory in a lucite box with windows so that he could feed her through slots, and so he could change her with gloves and have her completely in voluntary isolation, that there were people who said, that's not nice. You're not supposed to treat children like that. And eventually he had to end the experiment or go to prison. He didn't apologize for it. He was not apologetic. Why? Because he was a priest, a high priest of the technocratic religion. And he was conducting science, experimentation, in the tree of eugenics. See, eugenics and science go hand in hand. The scientists through the early 1800s, the most famous scientists in the world, the ones that you can look up in the encyclopedia and so on, were all eugenicists. Okay? Darwin was a eugenicist. Okay? They were all eugenics people. And basically, you can look up what is eugenics. Okay? But basically, what it means is it's called evolution of the species and survival of the species and the elimination of inferior species in favor of superior species based on any of 100 qualities of intelligence, durability. Aggression is actually a big one. If you read Darwin's Evolution of the Species, that in fact one of the most important qualities that quote unquote guarantees that a species will become dominant in an ecosystem and will survive to perpetuate its offspring into the future is violence quotient, aggression. So Darwin actually scientifically proved, no he didn't, bullshit, scientifically proved that evolution of the species, one of the most important factors of evolution of a species is in fact aggression. In other words, and let's define what aggression is. It's where I kill you and take your stuff. It's where I kill you and take your stuff. It's where I kill the males in your species so I can impregnate the females. And then the babies are more like me than they are the former males in your line. And then if we do that after several generations, then the offspring are just like me. Okay? Darwin. A lot of you had a little Darwin in high school, and maybe you had a little Darwin in college, and maybe you did a little biology, or you did a little. The question is going to be, what was the last thing that I was talking about? What did I say?
Darwin.
Darwin.
The violence and aggression.
Granted. There are university-level doctorate programs in evolutionary biology with many tomes and books and many research advocates that are trying to convince that this Darwinian evolution is a thing, okay? And you know, I'm actually gonna say I don't know for sure myself if they're right or they're wrong. But what I can do is I can actually judge the effect of that philosophy, if you will, because that's what it is, because it was conjecture, and you can read in Darwin's own words that he had an idea, that he had an idea, right? Conjecture is just his opinion, just an idea, just his opinion. And he was able to convince enough people of his idea, of his thought philosophy, of his extrapolation, that they declared it a science before there was actually any research. They accepted his note-taking and conjecture on what he thought he was observing to be fact and to actually be science and to be scientific fact. But one of the criteria of Darwin's theory of evolution is that violence, okay, i.e. murder and mayhem, theft, as a matter of survival of the fittest. That's what he called it. See, that sounds nice, doesn't it? Survival of the fittest. What if you're not the fittest? Who decides who's the fittest? What if I decide who's the fittest? Just I decide that I get to decide who's the fittest, and I write the manual on what are the fittest criteria, the ability to reproduce, which also, by the way, means that the fittest have to be only and exclusively within a certain age group. They've got to be in the age group of reproduction. So they got to be having sex and they got to be making babies. So the ones that are either too young or too old to fit that criteria already are not the fittest. So they're going to go. They got to go. They're not going to be favored by the future, okay, because they are no longer in the game of evolution. So you have to reproduce to be in the game of evolution, okay? And then I already mentioned the fact that that this is described as war, deadly combat, war, where one species destroys and in many cases consumes the deficient, ineffective species, that literally destroys. And there is a little bit of a problem with human evolution when we have this, you know, Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, Homo sapien, Denisovian, you know, we're talking about the 20 other species of human beings that we believe actually existed before quote-unquote us. But there was, up until quite recently, there was this idea. First they tried to say that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens did not live together at the same time in the world. Well, we now know that's not true. We now know that there are Homo sapien human beings, like we know, modern ones, that lived 40,000 years ago and were doing art and math and making things, building tools, and had social structure, and they made some of the most beautiful art that you could possibly look at. Look at the documentary called Cave of Dreams, okay, which is about a 36,000-year-old cave that has thousands of paintings in it, and these paintings are unbelievable. They are suitable to be in the Louvre. Some of these paintings are so intricate and so artistic and just so graphic that literally it'll blow your mind. It'll blow your mind. You will want to go there immediately and see for yourself, okay? And even in that documentary, which is 2 hours long, they can only show a fraction of the paintings. 36,000 years. Well, they've now found Neanderthal settlements equally as old, even 40,000 years old and more. Guess what they did also? They were artistic. They were artistic social tool makers. And they were bigger and faster and stronger than the puny Homo sapiens. In any contest of evolutionary strength, ability, or agility, the Neanderthals would have won every single time. And in fact, now the most current, you can look at Robert Seffer, anthropologist. You want to get some ideas about this. He's amazing, by the way. One of my favorite documentary people, anthropologists. But the thing about it is, no, we didn't warfare with them and beat them up and destroy them and cannibalize them in order for Homo sapiens to rule the world. Actually, that's not how it went. The way that it went was they bred with us. They bred with us, and we are their descendants, mixed blood. So all of us have Neanderthal blood, have Neanderthal DNA. That DNA doesn't just worm its way into your mitochondria randomly, that the way that your great, go back 40,000 years, grandpa was probably a Neanderthal, okay? And so that whole bit of the Darwinian evolution of the Homo sapiens goes right out the window as soon as you actually contemplate what does the DNA record say. So already there's a problem with the science of evolution. Already there's a problem. I'm not saying that there's not a thing like evolution, but do I believe that it's like Darwinian evolution? Yeah, I say the jury's out. It's a theory at best. Okay? Theory at best. The Sumerians said we were the progeny of DNA experimentation with the Anunnaki and the Nephilim that took place 150,000 years ago, and that we are ourselves genetic hybrids that were developed by another species 150,000 years ago. That's actually written about in the mythology of the Sumerian culture that's in the cuneiform tablets in the British Museum, in the basement of the British Museum in London. But you're not supposed to know that either. The ancient peoples, the most ancient civilizations in the world, said that humans were a product of crossbreeding. Now, whether that crossbreeding was, maybe that's their interpretation of the Neanderthal cultures. And we now know Neanderthals had culture. Okay, they weren't these mindless ape-like creatures. They might have been ape-like, but they weren't mindless. Okay, faster, bigger, stronger, and according to cranial capacity, that's always the one that gets us. Like we say, the reason why we know dolphins are so smart is proportional. They have a human-sized cranial capacity, right? That's how we know that. It's all primates share that. But you know what? If you take your little protractor and your triangle out and you measure the interior cranial space of a Neanderthal skull, it's twice yours. It's twice yours. And that, well, let's don't emphasize that, because it doesn't make any sense to the current narrative, right? So much. And so, in my opinion, Neanderthals had medicine because they survive for, as an identifiable remnant species, right, for hundreds of thousands of years. Identifiable in the fossil record. And they lived in communities. And they were artistic. And they were tool builders. And they were hunters and gatherers and maybe many other things. Okay? And so would they have had illness in their communities? And would they have just grunted at each other and walked off from the sick person or clubbed them in the head or fed them to the saber-toothed tiger, you know, or what would they have done that? My thing is that because we now know they had communities, part of the function of all functional communities is the practice of medicine. And you cannot have a functional community without the practice of functional medicine. I believe that that is as important as this evolution thing. Maybe, in my opinion, far more. Far more. The reason why we survived is not because we were the toughest, biggest, baddest, meanest, right, because violence has to be part of it. You have to kill your competitors. You have to kill them in the Darwinian evolution, right? So that means our survival has always been linked to our core violence and the cultivation of violence as a species. In other words, the reason why we're violent as a culture is because we have always favored and given preference to people who are violent, while at the same time decrying the consequences of violence on a personal note. It's okay if it's violence against you. It's not okay if it's violence against me. That's the bottom line. Okay? But medicine is a chain of consciousness that's always existed, in my opinion, in humanity. I believe that's what the anthropology shows. I believe that's what the archaeology shows. Part of it, for example, recent ancient cities that have been excavated by archaeologists, that one of the ways that they determined that it was in fact an ancient city and that it was an ancient and thriving or persistent community for several thousand years or hundreds of years or whatever it is because usually the first thing that they find are baths, where people took baths. Hygeia, where people took baths. Okay? So why would the first thing, other than a temple, see, it goes like temple, bath, other stuff, right? Why would the first thing that an ancient civilization would build would be a bathhouse? I mean, come on. I mean, really, why would that be the first thing? If you didn't understand the role of water, I talked yesterday about how water is the first medicine, and water is what makes food work, and water is what makes nutrition work, and so on. But if you didn't understand that, then building a bathhouse and building a septic system to handle waste would not be the first thing, because the whole point of bathhouse and septic is to separate that which is unhealthy from you. That is science. But it's science based on direct observation for thousands of years. Cleaner people live longer. Cleaner people live. Cleanliness is next to godliness. Ha ha, we laugh. You know, it's like a thing. And my granny used to point at me, and she'd grab my hands and look at my fingernails, which were always disgusting because I lived out in the wilderness with the woods, with the wolves, and I climbed and I dug, and I was like a cross between a wolf and a mole person. I was equal, and some kind of arboreal creature. I was just as happy in a tree, as digging in a hole in the ground, as chasing things in the wild, and when I would come into the house, that's what I looked like, with the twigs in the hair and my disgusting fingernails and Lord knows unidentifiable substances all over my clothes and my body. And my granny would go, "Anthony, cleanliness is next to godliness," which I knew was her euphemism for, now I have to abandon my life, my ambitions, my wants, my needs, my necessities of life are now completely worthless because now I have to go and get in a bathtub until my granny is happy. And she would come in and she'd go, "Nope, not yet. Keep scrubbing. Now, probably should use some soap. It'll go faster." Cleanliness is next to godliness. Well, guess what? That's deep in your DNA. And that is actually the origin of all medicine. Remember, water's the first medicine. So the first medical practice is called hygiene, using water. Water's a universal solvent. Not only does it remove toxins from you, then the application of water with herbs and minerals called infusions, tinctures and essences and that kind of thing, teas, okay, is actually the first application of hygeia as an external medicine. So the first application is just to get you clean, and the second one is to then use the items or artifice from nature to enhance the cleanliness. Right? External detox just means wash, take a bath. Internal detox is drink a tea. Drink water, hydrate, then add things to the hydration. And that's really logical because over time people discovered that certain waters in certain places had different results than the waters in other places. that in fact, that if you had certain kinds of illness and you physically went to this geographical location where this spring was, and you drank that water, you would be cured. And even to this day, there are places that have been used like that since prehistoric times, like Lourdes in France. How old is Lourdes in France? Nobody knows. People, the pagans, quote unquote, poor pagans, they get smack talk because they're pre-Christian, and the proto-Christians were using the water in Lourdes long before there was such a thing as Christianity. They found fossils in the caves in Lourdes that are ancient fossils, and ancient indications that humans have always gone there for the water. Okay? And not just because they're...
You will grow to be tall, staring out